If your GPS says recalculating 3 times, turn around now. That sentence has saved my life twice, and it cost someone else theirs. I didn't learn it from a forum or a horror story. I learned it in the dark, with the rain chewing the road and the voice on my dash pretending to be lost. It started after midnight on County Road 17, a service drive nobody uses unless they're paid to. I was, technically. I inspect shoulders after storms for the county, and that night was one long tire bath through puddles the size of canoes. At 2:11 a.m., my phone lost signal, so I switched to the old Garmin in the glove box. It booted up like a stubborn old man who doesn't get out of his chair unless you promise coffee. I tapped in the last waypoint, Bridge 6 south of the quarry, and the map snapped to a skinny gray line I knew well. The first recalculating came when the pavement turned to patchwork and the wipers couldn't keep up. It was a hiccup, the kind you shrug off. The second hit at 2:17, right as the shoulder dropped away and the fog spilled out of the pines. The voice on the Garmin sounded different that time, an extra breath at the start, like someone leaning toward the mic. The third recalculation, I didn't ignore. I threw the hazard lights on and rolled to a crawl because the map rotated 90 degrees and showed a road cutting straight through a ravine I knew wasn't there. The highlight changed from blue to a color I'd never seen before, a kind of sickly green that made the rest of the screen look bruised. Proceed to the route, the voice said, but it dragged out the last word like it had to pull it out of something thick. My defroster fogged the glass from the inside. Outside, the fog didn't move at all. I put the truck in park and cracked the window. Everything smelled like wet iron. There was a sound just under what the ear calls silence, like a distant generator or a hive. On the right, where the ravine should have opened, the mist bulged and flattened against nothing, as if it had found an invisible wall. At 2:19, the dash clock hiccuped and slid back to 2:17, then stuck there. I told myself it was a surge, or cold affecting the contacts, or anything that sounded like the world I knew. Then the Garmin said recalculating in a voice that wasn't the Garmin's at all. Whoever spoke had breath and weight and a throat that clicked on the sea like they were swallowing. Turn around now, it told me. My hands moved before the rest of me did. I eased forward into the shoulder as if I were staging a U-turn for an audience. That's when I saw the guardrail ahead, wet with rain and scored with scratches too low for a car and too wide for a deer. They looked like fingernails dragged by something walking on its hands. I turned the wheel and the road made a new choice for me. The asphalt ahead angled slightly downhill, but the truck rolled backward as if the grade had flipped. The fog stayed put, like film grain on a dead frame. I pressed the brake, then the gas, and the truck obeyed a fraction of a second late, like I was driving underwater. Recalculating, the voice said again, almost gently. A shape passed through the beams ahead, not crossing so much as smearing along them, long and jointed and wrong. It didn't trigger the rain to sparkle like normal things do. It just absorbed light. I completed the turn so slow it felt like defusing something, and when my headlights rolled over the scratch marks again, each groove reflected back a thin line of green, the same color as the route. I didn't wait to see what would cover them next. I drove back the way I'd come, keeping the speedometer steady at 20 no matter how my foot begged for more. The Garmin went quiet, as if sulking. At the main road the fog loosened, the clock started counting time again, and my breath stopped fogging the glass. I pulled into the chevron at exit 12 and parked under the brightest thing I could find. When I popped the glove box to shove the Garmin away, there was condensation beaded along its screen, as if it had been breathing. 3 smudges on the plastic looked like fingertips dragged in from the edge of the frame. I wiped them away with a fast food napkin and watched the damp return in a new pattern, 3 short lines in a row. 3 times. I didn't report the washout until morning. The crew that went out wrote it up as a minor slide, nothing like what my map tried to sell me. That should have been the end. I deleted the track, shut the glove box, and told myself I was tired. A rule without a reason is just a superstition, and I don't like superstition. But the reason showed up in someone else's mouth 2 weeks later, and it tasted like copper when she said it. Her name was Myra, and she drove nights for a rideshare company because her days belonged to 2 kids and a mother who couldn't be left alone. She picked me up after another storm sign check because my truck decided to die in the only spot in town where nobody stops. I noticed the old Garmin suction cup to her windshield even though her phone ran the app. "You still use that?" I asked, and she laughed once without smiling. "Sometimes the phone doesn't know what road it's on," she said. "Sometimes it does, and that's worse." Then she said, like reading from a card she kept in her head, "If your GPS says recalculating 3 times, turn around now immediately." I asked her where she'd heard it, and she kept her eyes on the slick lanes and said, "From a father whose son didn't turn around." She told me about the kid like she'd told it 100 times, the way people get when they've sanded a wound down to a shiny stone. 19, first car, new job stocking the graveyard shift at the Ridgeway Market. A storm shoved the town sideways and every shortcut was a river. His phone kept bouncing the route, then the dash unit chimed recalculating once, twice. The third time, the father says, he told the boy to turn around. The boy laughed, said it was just the hill messing with satellites, and 2 miles later the ridge road wasn't there anymore. They found the car nosed into scrub with the rear wheels in the air and the front bumper pointing at a cut that never existed on paper. The boy's seatbelt was still clicked, the door was open, the footprint stopped 6 steps from the asphalt. The father started telling drivers the rule because nobody listened to him at the funeral. Myra said she didn't believe him until her own map turned the river green. She was taking a medical tech home after a double at the hospital, a quiet woman with a lunchbox on her lap and a voice that barely left her throat. The phone app said the bridge was closed, the Garmin said Dieter left, the rain said go to bed. Recalculating, the unit breathed, and the map darkened like a bruise. Once. Twice. The third time, the lunchbox woman touched Myra's arm and said, "Please don't." Myra turned the wheel and the power steering fought like she'd driven into syrup. The road behind felt longer than the road ahead, like the asphalt didn't want to remember her. She kept it at 23, eyes on the center line, hands loose, breath shallow. When they hit the main drag, the unit sighed and went normal, the route blew again, the voice synthetic and bored. The woman with the lunchbox opened it and showed Myra a charm on a string, wood burned with 3 short marks. "My aunt makes these," she said. "She works down by the ferry, and she says the river keeps secrets. Some nights it opens a mouth where there isn't one and tells you it's a road." Myra believed after that. I believed already, but hearing it out loud made the rule heavier, like a tool you don't belong holding. We drove the rest of the way quiet, and when she dropped me by the yard I gave her my card and told her to call if it ever said it again. 3 nights later, my phone buzzed at 1:43 a.m. The message was just the rule, no punctuation, like she didn't want to wake it up. I called and got nothing, then a text with a live location pin sliding along Harbor Road toward the freight yards. The rain was thin, the kind that makes the streets look like they're already underwater. I threw on boots, grabbed the spare radio from the office, and headed down in my personal truck because the county rig was still waiting on a new alternator. I stayed on the phone with her location like it could hear me. The pin stopped at a lot behind a chain-link fence coated with sea salt and flyers nobody reads. The yard used to belong to a towing company before the city strangled them with permits. Myra's car was there, lights on, engine running, driver door open, rain stitching the seat. Her phone sat face down on the hood, screen breathing small notifications that lit the drops like mercury. The Garmin on her glass glowed that same sick green, but there was no route, just a flat field of color and a word pulsing in the corner. "Proceed," it said, and each time it pulsed the rain seemed to pause like the whole night was listening for my decision. I called her name and the night threw it back wrong, the way big empty rooms do. There were footprints from the open door to the back of the lot and then sideways toward the fence, but the prints were too clean, as if the mud had risen up to meet the soles. I followed them to the fence and found a gap where the metal had been curled back like something had pushed through from the other side. Beyond the fence was a drainage cut, a ditch that should have been 6 feet deep and full of bottle caps and cattails. It wasn't. The ditch was a flat mirror of black, no ripple, no trash, no reflection of my light, just density. The footprints went right to the edge and stopped, heel marks digging in like whoever made them was trying to decide. "Myra," I said again, and the Garmin in her car said recalculating from 50 feet away. The voice didn't belong to plastic. It belonged to someone who had learned a word and was proud to show it off. I backed away from the edge and kept backing until the normal sounds came back, the small hiss of rain, the far truck on the highway, the radio at my hip whispering traffic codes to itself. We searched until dawn and into lunch with cops and a dog team, and the only new thing anyone found was that the ditch wasn't a ditch on any survey older than 15 years. The tow company that used to own the lot had filled it during a flood and never recorded the culvert they built under the fence line. On the news they called it an accident. I told myself the same thing until I looked at the screenshots of Myra's location again and saw the pin touch the edge of the green for a second and then disappear like a light turned off. That was the first. There was a second. 2 weeks after Harbor Road, the county sent me to check Old Mill Causeway after a king tide chewed at the pilings. The sky was clear for once, the kind of cold that makes glass sing. I told myself I could do daylight. Bad things like the dark. Then the Garmin woke by itself in the glove box, screen already green. It shouldn't have had power. I hadn't plugged it in. Recalculating, it breathed, and every gull on the rail lifted like a hand had clapped. I stopped before the rise, shoulder half gravel, half saltgrass crisped white. Ahead, the causeway ran dead straight across marsh that looked solid until it remembered it was water. The map rotated 90 degrees, then again, as if trying different shapes to see which one fit me. Once. Twice. Heard the third? Not yet. But the unit pulsed, waiting. I cracked the door to listen. No wind, just a quiet like a vacuum waiting to fill. On the concrete, someone had chalked 3 short marks at ankle height, weathered down to ghosts. Myra's aunt, I thought, and then I heard a voice from my own speaker that wasn't mine. "Turn around now," it said, but the cadence was Myra's, the dry humor varnished off, the mother inside her speaking from underwater. I put the truck in reverse and felt the tires go light, like standing on a dock that's just started to float. The world leaned toward the marsh. The green on the screen poured to one side like liquid and held there, as if gravity had turned and the device knew before I did. A seam opened to my left where the marsh met the road, a straight black line that gulped once and stopped, patient. The Garmin said recalculating in a child's attempt at whispering. That was the third. I didn't look again. I backed down the crown of the road, mirrors full of blue sky that didn't belong to me. When I hit the solid tree line, the world exhaled. The unit died with a small click like a jar sealing. I filed the report with photographs and salt measurements and never wrote the part about voices. The county poured fresh concrete and declared the pilings fit. A week later, a fisherman went missing off the flats at low tide where the seam had opened. They found his truck in the pullout, door open, belt clicked. The prince stopped at the edge, 6 steps from safety. The paper called it disorientation. I don't argue out loud anymore. Here's what I think when I can stand to think. The green isn't a route. It's a mouth painting itself as a road. Recalculating isn't confusion. It's courting. First, it checks if you'll listen. Second, it turns the world until you don't trust your own sense of straight. Third, it asks for permission. If you keep going, you've agreed. If you turn around, you were never there. Remember that.